All right, so unfortunately, I've been playing a lot of League of Legends, which has been not good for productivity, not good for sleep schedule, not good for mental health, not good for a number of things. But what it has been good for is there's a lot of really good stuff to look at in there. It's very, very nice looking. And I was especially happy with how the kind of Noxus skin of Summoner's Rift worked. I really, really like the look of it, which is interesting because I don't really gravitate towards that type of stuff normally, where it's kind of that like warm fall, like autumnal oranges and yellows and stuff like that we have up here. So this was a real fun challenge for me to make, actually, kind of stepping outside of my comfort zone. But what I really wanted to do this for is because I think it's a really good way to discuss this sort of like central conflict at the middle of the workflow here. So I think people have a tendency to see these things as black and white, right? Where on one side of the workflow, you have like very procedural approaches in Designer, right? That there's a lot of benefit to, right? There's a lot of versatility, a lot of flexibility. You know, it's easy to work with, a lot of like ability to go back and change stuff and have it flow through. Like it's a really nice thing that has a lot of benefits to it. And then people see that as sort of like entirely separate from this other side of the workflow, where they think about things more like hand painting, sculpting, and doing bakes from those sculpts to paints over. It's kind of much more like handcrafted feel, right? And I just don't think that those two things need to be separate. I think you can take the best parts of both where it makes sense to, and come up with a workflow that kind of approaches both of them. And this is a great opportunity to talk about some of those things. So this is a really big graph. It's enormous. The actual full Patreon tutorial where we go through this kind of step by step and build it, it's like 11 hours long, which is for sure the longest long form content on the Patreon. Today we're going to go through it, like just looking at this, it's really, really big, right? But we're going to talk about the parts I think are the most relevant and get people started on it. So for one thing, looking at these, what we're going to spend a lot of time on is like building these initial stone shapes, and in particular, getting the round kind of rings of them along the pedestal, and how to get this sort of damage on these that's indicative of, like, you know, if you're in ZBrush, which is where I like to sculpt, it'd be like, you know, trim dynamic, you know, sculpting in Blender with trim tools or whatever, to get these really kind of chunky, fun bevels. That's something I'm really interested in going over today, where I think you'll learn a lot. Something also I'd like to do is go over how these grass blades were built, because they make up a huge part of the final look. And it's a good opportunity to talk about how we're doing that kind of blend between those two workflows. So for example, here, like I can choose to paint moss in an exact place I want to with this setup. So I can talk a little bit how we built this. Like for instance, I could go and say, you know what, I want some more grass right here. And I could go into this little SVG node here and build a mask to place some more grass specifically here. Right, and it'll take a sec to step through the graph. But this is sort of embracing those two workflows, right? Of this actual hand-placed specific things going in specific areas, but also having it procedural, because this will just step through the graph. And since it's all procedural, it'll just add it in. So that's a fun one to talk about. We're talking about this water, some cool tricks you can use with the PBR render node to get some of this painting done for you, more or less. And then a big thing too is just talking through adding those kind of like visible brush strokes as well. We're going to spend some time on. Not all of them, right? That'll be in the big, huge tutorial because it's just too much stuff. But talking about how you get these kinds of things, right? These kind of visible brush strokes in the stone pattern that I think are really, really worth going over. To try to, a big thing here is just not having as much noise and dealing more with these kind of big, broader, you know, painterly shapes, stuff like that. So again, if you prefer to, you know, do the big handheld adventure through this all, it's available on Patreon. Like I said, it's 11 hours across 4 videos, I think. But if you want to just like kind of get the, you know, the basics of what we're doing here, this will be more than sufficient. So let's just get to the graph and let's just like see what makes this thing tick and kind of hit those kind of interesting points. So the first thing I was interested in rebuilding here is this sort of, the main shape of this stone pedestal is this kind of repetitious pedal pattern that keeps getting inset. A lot of things were on 5s here, actually, like 5 spokes. Like most things were like that. The flower, the pattern behind the flower, like the main rose pattern, all of these big pedestals. So making that initial shape, I did a couple of things I thought worked fairly well. So I just took a polygon here and rotated it 90 degrees just to get on the flat side that I wanted. And then I also put this into a tile generator because I wanted to be able to change the size independently in a way that was, you could do it on transform and disable tiling. But I find this sort of difficult to use with, you know, it's sort of imprecise. So you don't have access to the matrix to like figure out where you want to actually, you know, where it currently is and where it should be. So I would prefer to just use a tile generator, set it to 1 by 1 and go to image input, and then just go to your normal size mode, not absolute, like this. And then I can just, you know, I know it's at 0.8 now. I could return it to its normal. Like I just feel this is more comfortable for me. And then I needed to put a big stretch here because we're basically making this shape, but I need to pull it down all the way. So what you could do, and I did something different, but what you might be able to do is, you know, shrink this down and just add it to the original shape to kind of create the legs on it. And you could use your cropping area on your blend mode to just take the top off. And then you just have to kind of like, you know, mess around with this until it's the exact width you want. And then you have to switch this bottom to be 0.5, so it's right at the halfway mark. And I just find that this is a little irritating because I don't like anytime you have to kind of like change something somewhere whenever you want something to change and then change it somewhere else to have it keep up. Like if I decide to change the size of this again for whatever reason, now I have to change this as well, right? You could link them together, stuff you could do. But a fun thing you can do here that actually I think just works way better is I could make a shadows node of this. So this just projects a shadow, assuming your light is coming from a certain distance. It's sort of like a drop shadow in Photoshop. And I set this really high and turned the tiling off. And you can see it just shoots this black line down the middle. I don't even think I need high samples for this. You could make the node a bit cheaper and use less. But then I invert this. And I think you probably see where I'm going. Because if you level this, histogram, scan it, whatever you want to do, this creates that white shape for us. And we can just blend this back on with an add or something. Could be max, whatever. And now what's cool is, this is perfect, right? It's like pixel perfect. It does it right to the spot we want it to. And it's live. Like if I decide to shrink this a bit more, it comes for the ride, right? I don't have to, again, it's nice to not have things happening in multiple places at once, right? Like it's better to just have one area where you change stuff and then everything else changes around it. I find that's a lot more helpful generally. So that's how I would treat that. The next thing I wanted to do is create these warps because up on the top half, it kind of bends in. Well, and it bends in here as well. So I wanted to make sure we could get that going. And for that, I just used a directional warp like this. And there's a couple things we could do. We basically we know that this is at the halfway mark because this polygon was built at the exact halfway mark of the texture. So I just got a gradient and used a curve node to remap this gradient. So it goes, instead of going from black to white, like it does in the slope here, it goes from black to white and then back to black again. So I made a new node and put it right at the halfway mark. And made it closed all of its tangents, and then brought the last node down to 0 again. Now this gradient does exist, right? You might say, okay, well, why don't you just get the gradient 3 or whatever? But we're going to be able to modify this, which is nice. And then I only want this gradient to occur on half of the texture. So I'm going to divide this by 2 and just offset it by 0.5 so that we have 2 of them. Because I'm only going to warp this top part first. So I put this here. And obviously, there's a couple problems with this. We don't want to affect the bottom with this one as well. We want to have them controlled separately. So I could make a blend and move my top or my bottom cropping area to 0.5. So this just grabs the bottom one. And so now I'm only warping this bottom section. And I could use a mirror grayscale here because obviously this side is all screwed up. It's pushing out where we would rather both sides be pushing in. So if I just do this, and actually the default settings work, right? We're mirroring across the x-axis. And this does our curve here. And now we might not want the curve to be this linear, right? But that's why we have the curve node. Because we can go up here and like open the tangents and soften this until we get the kind of scoop we want, right? Whether we want to be really deep or shallow, like we have a lot of control over it using the curve node. And then this intensity becomes like how much the scoop, how powerful that scoop is, basically. From here, I want to do the same up here. So I can just get a second blend mode. And this time, instead of using the bottom crop, I'll use the top crop to grab the topmost one. And I'll do a separate directional warp because I may want to control the scoop of this one slightly differently. In fact, I may want a different curve node as well, but we'll just see how this works. And we can just mirror this again. And we get this fun shape. It's actually fairly close. But looking at it, you'd think like, okay, well, this should be a bit... Because it's a painting, right? It's a little inconsistent. And it should, right? The painting was great. But because someone's just painting this, is my assumption, like onto a piece of geo. It might even be a plane. Sometimes the things looked a little different area to area. Like for instance here, it looks like this stone is on top of this stone, but here it looks like it does the reverse all of a sudden, right? So I think the painting is really nice, but when you're making a texture like this where I can't really, you have to kind of, I'd rather pick a way it goes and just kind of stick with that. So I think this could be smaller. There's a number of things we could do to fix that. Right, we could make it so that this side is actually smaller. So we could go get a trapezoid transform, or even use a vector warp. Or like another thing we could try is just shrinking it a little. It's not that much smaller. So you could take this and just turn your size X down. And turn the warp here a bit stronger. We could also, to our gradient here, make it a bit stronger on this side. Right, so if we took a gradient, because wherever the brightness is, the stronger the warp. So what we could do is duplicate this section. And I can now use a different curve here. So wherever the top end is, it should be here. I could bring it in more, right? So the warp is actually still stronger here. So you have a lot of flexibility with how you change kind of the attitude of that warp. I also think it was too tall. Like this is actually much shorter than this part. So I can go up to, really easy to fix, right? Because we built this system that handles it for us. So we could go to our tile generator and just turn the size Y down until we're happy with the scoop. Right, so it's nice that we really only have a couple areas where stuff is actually changing, and it's very predictable. And so my kind of theory is that whenever you're working in Designer, it's best if you can always create these sort of systems that are very easily adjustable. The Patreon video, like I said, is like 11 hours where we go through making like this entire thing step by step. And after those 11 hours, I still spend probably another like 2 or 3 on my own, just like tweaking things. And that's really easy to do if you've set up all these things in a way that is very conducive to you doing all these edits at a kind of, you know, constructive way. So once I had this shape, I had to make the 5 pointed star of them. So I just got a splatter circular and plugged these in. And I know I need 5 of them already. And you get your image input. These don't start on the right angle, right? Like I'd rather this one be pointing straight up. So I also want to scale these up a bit. Probably a lot more. Because we're just doing a couple of things in this tutorial, we'll just scale it up quite a bit bigger than I would have. I just want them to match. Like that's fine. And then the rotation, I want to rotate the whole ring so that this is straight up instead of on this angle. So it's not the pattern rotation. This rotates the individual patterns, like the shapes, not the ring itself. And I actually found that the exact right rotation here is 18 to get it pointing straight up. And then I just needed to fill this gap. There's a couple ways you could do it, like procedurally. You could, for instance, like invert this, get a flood fill node. And what's fun about flood fill is if you split out the channels, the red and the green channels are your UVs for each shell, like your texture coordinates. But your blue and alpha channels are your the width of the cells. Like the blue is, I think, the width horizontally, and A is the width vertically, expressed as a grayscale value. That's why this one is so much grayer than all this, because this is very tall. So what you could do is take like either of these widths. So I'll just take the blue, right, which is the X width. And I don't want all of this white everywhere, right? So I could take my initial, well, I won't be able to do that necessarily, but there's a lot of things you could do. You could take like a material selector, turn this into color, and then using the material selector, I'm going to grab that gray color to get that mask and just add this back in to the splatter to fill in the gap, right? But there's a lot of ways you could do that. So once I had this pattern, this sort of became and maybe I want to scoop those more, so I could go back to the directional warp and turn that up a bit. That's the top warp. We need this one, right? So we can curve it a bit more. This sort of became the like backbone of the whole material, because so much stuff kind of keyed off of this original shape. So the first thing I want to do, and we're going to do today, is like create these stones, these steps of stones all around. Because we basically did a lot of that over and over and over. So I think this is fairly representative of what we did in the big tutorial. So if I take a bevel and bevel this inward all the way, and then auto level it, what I was able to do here is create a way of grabbing all of our different sections, essentially. So if I could now quantize this, I can make stair steps, right? So these kind of became the foundation of how those steps were built. You could also do the opposite, where you bevel away from it potentially and get these. They're a bit more rounded, right? Which is not probably what you want. You want these actual sections here. But I was able to turn these into those stair sections. And I'm seeing these are a little tight. So it's possible you want to change that. But you could grab this, your quantize, right? This just makes it into steps, right? It takes that gradient ramp. And basically you can imagine a curve that does this. Like it works the same way as this, really. As if you had used a curve node and created a bunch of individual steps that were perfectly straight. Right, so it turns it into like several grayscale values that are kind of stepped. Right, this is just obviously much easier to use, right? Being able to just pick the amount of steps here is much nicer. But I'm going to take the original shape, our kind of master shape here, and multiply it over. And then these, like I said, just became the basis for all of those like rows of stone that circle the whole project, like these guys. And I'm seeing that this is probably a little too narrow, so I might go and widen that up a bit, which again, because we've set it up nice, I can just go back to the tile generator and increase the size very easily. Right, we have like a lot of control over this, which is nice. And maybe the warp is a little too strong. Something like that. Cool. And if you want these to be variable sizes, you can do stuff like take your gradient and curve the gradient, because right now this gradient is very linear. It just goes from black to white in kind of a linear interpolation, but we can curve the grayscale values more or less to one direction. Right, so now we get smaller. Because it transfers much slower up here, we get much bigger sections here and then much smaller ones closest to the black. Or we can do the reverse, right, where they get bigger the further out they are. Right, so this is a bit bigger than the next row, which I think I chose to do actually because I wanted them to have a bit of different size. And so this one was just a little bit bigger than the one right next to it. And so that was really it. what I did from here, and I think I made a portal node here. Portal nodes are really useful to stay organized in the main graph. I wouldn't be able to make that graph without it, basically. But you can drag this node off and press Alt, or you can search for a dot node, and it's the same thing. What's cool about the dot nodes is I can go to this and call this something. So I'd call it like star pattern, or to be careful, I'd call it like pattern star. The name doesn't really matter, it's just how I organize stuff. And then anywhere else on the graph, I can go dot and grab pattern star, and it teleports it basically, right? But I don't need to see that noodle kind of stretch across the whole material. It's just like a much more organized way to work, right? It's easier to see what you're doing. And what I did here was I did a histogram scan to get the middle section. So like here. So this became like the middle big section as an example. Like the actual stone pedestals here. And now I have room to make these. So I liked this project using a lot of the bevel smooth because I was doing so much beveling. The bevel smooth is really nice because it lets you smooth your bevels, I guess, and you avoid that kind of jankiness. So as an example, if you use bevel smooth, sorry, if you use the ordinary bevel, and there's ways of fixing this. We've talked about them a lot actually in a number of videos. We did how you can fix some of this. There's ways to adjust this. But if you use the bevel here, you are going to get some sort of artifacting along the edge. The bevel smooth corrects that, right? We get these really nice, I'll just use a normal map so we can see it a bit better. We get a much smoother result here. It does round our shape more, and the more smoothing we do, the more the shape gets rounded. But you normally are kind of looking for a jump, like a happy bounce between those two things. And you can use the mask threshold as well to like tighten it a bit. So you have options, right? But it's nice because we're going to do a lot of beveling like this to the shape. And it's really helpful to get rid of those artifacts as you go. However, I need this. I don't want this to bevel outward from the original shape. I want it to bevel inward. So I actually have to invert this to do my bevel inward. And I don't need to go that far for sure. But I could set it to full. And then auto level it. And then I'm going to invert this to turn it back right side up. And then I can histogram scan it to create like, basically I'm putting the width of the bevel on this node, instead of having to control it on the bevel smooth. And this gives us a really nice clean result. And I'm just going to take a second here to go to our material parameters and both turn the height scale up, and so the displacement is stronger. It's a little strong, like this or something. And turn the amount of triangles up. So I have to go now to the renderer, now that they've moved where this setting goes, and turn the tessellation factor up. Just so it's a little bit nicer to look at. Cool. The height's a little high. But so now that I have this kind of central platform, I want to go through and create those rings of stones that occur around them. So I thought this was really fun, but how we decided to tackle this. So what I did is I got a material selector and convert our kind of star pattern here into color information, so I can isolate individual layers. So I know this is where our main shape ends. I want to grab this one. So I go to the material selector, go down to the picker and pick this one. And now I have a mask of just this. And you would say, okay, well, we could just duplicate this chain and bevel this entire shape this time. Right? And we have now the beveled version of the tiles outside, right? Like the edge of them. But there's more than that, because we want to be able to create the actual breaks per, like right now, it's just one big long, a tile the long way, right? But we want to have these individual sections first. So how do we tackle that particular problem? And I thought this was really fun. So what I need first is a mask, because we're going to use splines, spoiler. I love whenever I get a chance to use them, I'm pretty stoked. But I need a mask that's the exact middle of this pattern. That's kind of the first ingredient. So that's actually pretty easy to do. I'm just going to do a bevel, and an ordinary bevel is fine here. And I'm going to bevel it all the way in, and then auto level this because the bevel is just really closed. And what I'm going to do now is get a normal, I'm using the Sobel filter often when I'm trying to do this just because it's a bit smoother. The result is smoother. And if I'm using a normal Sobel, I'm going to use a curvature Sobel as well. And you can see this white line is that midpoint. So I can just histogram scan this until I get this guy. And this is our mask of the middle of that shape. And so we have this. This is the exact middle. Really, really cool, fun trick to grab that mask. And then what I'm going to do is use this to generate a flood fill. Right, just invert it first because I need white islands like this. And then I'm going to use our same trick to just grab the middle section only. So I can just get an RGBA merge, or split rather. And either the alpha and blue channels should be very similar because the width and height is so similar. But I'll invert this so that it's black. I also need to close that gap up on our flood fill. So I'm going to get a distance, and we have a little gap there just because that's where the original mask on the flood fill is. So I'll plug that into distance, this into source, set it to only source, set it to full to get rid of that gap. We did I think it's the most popular video on the channel, the flood fill one, where we actually go through like the importance of using distance nodes to close your flood fills. So that's worth checking out there. But now what's cool is I can auto level this, and I just have a black and white mask that's the exact midpoint of that shape. Right, so just to demonstrate that, if we take our original step shape, you don't have to do this if you're building along, and I subtract, you see that this just cuts the shape in two. And you'll see why that's important. Because I'm going to take this and use this handy node called mask to path. So it's going to take a black and white mask like this and turn them into paths. Like this. You can see this is the path itself. The little colored node, it's like a preview of it. And you can smooth out that path. We actually probably do that a bit later. And you could also change how much decimation is happening. The lower the number, the more expensive the node, and the closer the path is going to fit to your shape. Or like how smooth it's going to look. Because you can think about it kind of like the resolution of the path. If you have it really high decimation, you can see the stepping of it. So you need a bit. You don't need too much, but enough to keep this as like tight as you can. And then what you do is use paths to splines. As you plug the paths into the paths input. In this node, you can't really see because it's just a bunch of data of the different splines. You could preview them here to just see what they look like. But what we're going to do is take these splines and scatter cuts along them. So I'll take the scatter on spline grayscale node and plug all these in. How I plugged all of those in is by, you can go up here and switch from standard, which is just one node at a time, to material, which will drag all of the same type out to each other, which is just kind of a nice workflow advance, like a speed up, I guess, optimization. You can also just press 1 or 2 on your keyboard to switch between those nodes. So I'm going to connect all those, and you can see that it's scattering just by default these circles all along that path. Now I don't want to use circles, I'm going to use squares. And I don't want as many of them, so I'm going to turn the spacing way up. You can also switch from spacing to amount if you just want to put a certain amount of them around. Like maybe you want 32 of them or something, right? I don't know. It's up to you. And then I'm going to stretch these out taller. So I'm going to go down to size and turn their size Y up. And these are going to become the cuts for the different sections of our stone tile. Right, I want these to be pretty thin. And basically we'll be able to use these. And where we had our stone step originally, I'm going to use these before I bevel everything to subtract away from the original shape. And this creates those breaks that we want. Let's put these here. Just reorganizing this bit in the big huge tutorial, in all the big tutorials on Patreon. You'll see me do that a lot, like take stuff and just reorganize it so it just makes a bit more sense. But this is nice because I'm going to duplicate this. Now when we bevel this, we get all of our different shapes. The smooth is kind of smoothing them into each other. So I'm just going to go... The smoothing is just, remember I said you have to do kind of a compromise. I'm just using a normal so you can see here. A compromise between the smoothness of the bevel and the tightness of it, right? So they're blending into each other right now. So I'm going to go to the bevel smooth and turn the smoothness down a bit until they're separated. Right, and then this creates, and I might want to go, I actually might want to bevel these outward actually, in this case, so we don't have that gap. So I'll probably just bevel these out, the reverse direction. So I don't need to invert these. Like that. And we really don't need them to be that big. Oops, 0.005. And this does a really great job. And I won't need the histogram scan at this point or the invert, because we're not inverting it on the bevel smooth. It's a bit of a tidier way here. But now we get these cool breaks between each piece of stone. And you could just max blend these in to our original one. And you get that fun breakup of the actual stone tiles. And if you wanted a wider break between them, you could just go to your tile generator or your splatter on spline grayscale here and just increase the X size of these. So you have you're cutting a bigger gap in. If you wanted a thicker bevel. But I think this works really, really well. And this was kind of like I said, like, it was the foundation of how a lot of this stuff worked. There were some adjustments you could do to this. Like for one thing, it did create some kind of awkward shapes. Like for example, I didn't want I would rather enforce that there was always a cut here. Because if you look at the reference, there always is a cut right there. As well, there's always a cut here at the bottom of the curve. So there's actually some fun ways you can enforce that happening. So what I did was up here, I needed to get a line going right through this, because that's where we want to enforce that one edge in the brick pattern. So the way I did this is just got a shape, scaled it way down. So I just need a really thin line here. And I used an RGBA merge to make this our red channel and this our green channel, because I want to be able to use this later in the graph. So I'm just sending this information along with it. Now I can't plug this into a splatter circular because it's a grayscale one, but this allows us to do another cool thing. I can switch to splatter circular color. And instead of trying to, go reset all the color splatter circular settings so that it matches this one, what you can do is go up to the existing splatter circular grayscale, go up to the parameters here, little hamburger menu, and go to copy parameters. And if you go to the color one now, and you can go to paste them, and it's going to paste any parameter that changed that's the same name. So for instance, you can see like pattern amount that was 5 went to 5 here. So that means it's nice. You don't have to like go back and if you ever switch from color to grayscale or grayscale to color, either direction on a node, you can always go back and refactor that, which is really nice. I do need to do a couple things here. It doesn't like there's not an alpha channel. So I'll go here, fill that with alpha. It doesn't like the blending of that necessarily, so I'm just going to go make a alpha channel of this. There you go. And now they actually blend properly. And what we'll do here, this still works. We'll turn this, I'm going to just grab the red, right? So I'll go material selector. We still want to fill in that gap. So what we'll do, we'll leave this here for now. And I need a green line along the middles of this as well. So what I'll do is actually duplicate this splatter circular. And instead of inputting pattern inputs, I'll just go to square. And make these really, really long and thin. Right, so thin them out a ton. Pull them back. I probably want to turn the tiling off as well in this node just to make this a little bit simpler to look at. And so I'll go up to the tiling attributes up on the top of the node and go to absolute don't tile because I don't want them to wrap around. But these can be a lot thinner. Really, really thin. And I need this to be flipped upside down because ultimately what I'm going to do is go to RGBA merge, RGBA split, like this. So I'm splitting it apart and then merging it again because I want to mix this line in with the green. Right, so take this, add it, like that. Now you can see, right, we actually want these green spokes to be here, not in the middle of the sections. So all I have to do is take this, mirror it vertically, and now we get this shape pattern, which is really helpful. And what we can do with this is go pattern star masks edge. And I'll send it down here. And what's really cool, we can do a number of things with this. I can grab an RGBA split and grab just the green channel, which is our kind of mask here. And we can use this to make sure that we always enforce a line in those specific areas. Right, so if I take our green channel and add it, we're always going to make sure we put a line. Oops. Put it into the wrong input. We enforce having a line in those specific places, right? Including right here. But the problem is we can now also always have, and this isn't at the exact halfway mark, so we probably want to move that a little bit. But we also don't want possibly to have edges show up so close to those enforced edges. Like for example, this becomes a very small block, right? So you can actually plug in a mask here to get these to not show up in certain areas. So what I did there was just got a bevel away from this. So just set this to like full. And this just became a mask for basically a tolerance of how far away from that section you could be before you start spawning one of these cuts. So if I plug this into mask map and go down on the scatter, as you turn this up, you're forcing them to go away from those areas, right? So you're never going to spawn one very, very close to the existing cracks. If I put this all the way up there, you wouldn't have any. But this threshold just becomes a tolerance on that. So it allows you to clear up those, so you don't wind up with these really, really small rock cuts. And all the subsequent rows was just doing this again. Like I would take this whole section and duplicate it. Like that. And with this material selector, instead of selecting this row, I would need a separate material selector. And I would pick the outermost one. And all of these will just step through and create our second row of stones. So I would just max these on again. I'll put a link to this graph in the YouTube description so you can follow along with it. And I would need to increase the width of the bevel. Like it's a little tight. So I'd have to play with that a little. You'd even just transform this a little bit bigger if you wanted to. There's a lot of things you could do to fix that. But this is hopefully people are understanding like how I was able to go about creating these are like, in my opinion, like the bulk of the graph, creating just these stone steps. And then we did all sorts of different detail, right? In the big Patreon video, we like added all the stone surfacing and all the edge cracks and all that fun detail. But I think what I'd like to do is focus on one layer right now. And we're going to add some of that damage just to give people an idea of, ways you can think about it, basically. So what we're talking about here is getting these kind of plane changes. If you do ZBrush or anything, you do any kind of digital sculpting, you think about it like a trim dynamic or a trim smooth border or something. So we can talk about ways in which you break this apart and get this kind of sculptural detail. So we could do it on this one, but let's focus on doing it on, well, yeah, let's try doing it on this one first because it's the same principle. So we'll do it to this guy. I actually did a similar trick. So I got a histogram scan and just scanned this guy so that I got just the topmost part, just the white. So put the position very, very low. And then we did something similar where we went mask to paths and then path to spline. Like this. And then scatter on spline. And then what I scattered on these was, instead of these discs, I used parabolas. And I got them to be pretty long. So I made them a bit shorter than you'd need them to be. And then set this pretty high to like 3 or 4 or something like that. And then you can add some random scale and what else would you want? You could add some like color random. So you go to random luminance. And right now they're all in a perfectly straight line. So you can do stuff like give them some random offset along the spline. So you can do random offset on spline so they all kind of like have a random position along it instead of being all perfectly one after the other. It scatters them around. And then you could do random offsets from the normal. So they're not all in a perfectly straight line. And you don't need a ton of this. So this just scatters them around a bit. And ultimately what I was doing was inverting this. And this is kind of our damage pattern. And we can just use something like a min blending mode to make these cuts. And now we would want to go here, and these probably need to be a lot bigger. So we can go to their X size and scale them up. Whichever we got to do. And then for the placement of them, this histogram, because it's scanning along the shape of our bevel, basically where we put this position is where these show up. So as I scan down this, it moves them to the outermost part of the shape. But it's nice because what this does is create these like scoops right along the edge. And obviously this is a little intense, right? So I would go to level and turn them down a bit. But that's essentially how we got that edge damage to work. They're a little short right now, so I would maybe have less of them. So switch it to the shape and mount mode. Use a lot less, so we'll go to like 120 or something. And that's how you start it. You could also just make these way longer. There's a lot more you could do here. Scale them up a bunch. There we go. And that's the basic idea. The other thing you're seeing is we're getting all these artifacts. That's a tricky thing. It's annoying because the splatter on spline grayscale, its background node is the primary node, and since there's nothing plugged into it, it defaults to 8-bit. So that's what's giving us these steps in the gradient. So you can go to this node itself and go up to its bit depth, or its output format, and go to absolute and set it to at least 16. And that'll clear up those problems. But hopefully you can see how we were using this to create those kind of just initial plane changes along the shape. And you could do stuff like, for instance, like up here gets a little finicky, right? Like where it curves in, it can get a little jank. That's where it's a nice, like this guy just kind of skips off into no man's land. That's where it's not a bad idea to go into your mask and smooth this. So it's just not such a hairpin turn. So I might actually go up here and add a bit of smoothing. And that can smooth out, like this looks much better now on the edge. It follows the path in a way that makes a bit more sense, right? We don't get those weird outliers as much. But this is like the foundation of how I went about controlling. And I just did this to multiple layers and stacked on different types of detail in order to get all of the kind of plane changes and edge damage along the sides of all of our stone shapes. And again, this is much more extensive in the actual Patreon video. Okay, so we're back in the scary complete graph, the big 11-hour one. But what I wanted to talk about quickly is how we made the initial kind of these fun stylized grass shapes that we then used to scatter all over our shape. I thought that'd be a nice thing to try. So I would call this a new graph, call it like grass blade generator or something. We don't need this to be very big. It's like 512 by 512 is perfectly fine. And what I was noticing about those grass blade shapes is they're really interesting. I love the way this is painted, it's gorgeous, but you get all they're really like chunky, and they have all these weird, like it'll be smooth and curved and then be a sharp line and then curve again and then be a sharp line. They're really like chunky and like, they're very playful, right? They have this fun kind of shape to them. I think is really important to try to capture if we're trying to imitate it. So what I wanted to do is make just an individual blade first. And the way I did that was to get a splatter circular, because I want to get those really like kind of angly shapes to it. And what I did here is set this to square. And I think I picked like, I don't know, 7 or 8, some kind of odd number is probably better. And I'm going to set this radius out to like 0.5, so they're right at the edge of the canvas, and I'm going to turn the tiling off so they stop kind of looping around like you're seeing here. So go to my tiling mode, turn it off, switch it to no tiling, and then I can scale these way up so that they intersect with each other, and then give them a bit of size Y as well. But then what's fun is random size Y is going to make all of these be a really obscure length. Like now the edges, because these all have a random size coming in from the edges, these edge lengths become all random length. So we get this really kind of oblong shape. And I can see this, and you can see we get a bunch of different ones. So I want to isolate this. So I'm going to invert this and grab a flood fill. And just to make sure, this one happens to be okay, but you can easily get a seed here, which has another little island. So we don't want that. So we can go flood fill. You could do flood fill to bounding box size. It's very similar to the trick we've been doing already. Because this just shades the islands a darker color, the smaller they are. So this one basically goes away. So we could histogram scan this, because those little extras, if we ever get them, are going to be very, very small, like this guy is. So as long as we have this histogram scan on a reasonable number, we'll never grab one. As we circle through this splatter circular and give it random seed, well, we never catch an extra shape. Right? Even when they do show up, like we can actually push the random even more. If we go to our splatter circular and turn the size Y random up even more. This guy. See, we can catch these extra shapes, but our flood filled to bounding box size is culling them out, which is really nice. So what I want to do with these is taper them. So I did this pretty quickly with just a trapezoid transform. And you can go to your top stretch, and I set this to a really high number. And I put a bit of bottom stretch too, to kind of slim them out. But this now gives us a kind of grass blade shape that's got these really variable edge lengths. Like it's a much simplified shape. And we get some that are more rounded and some that are more sharp. So I thought this was like a really interesting way of creating these like initial shapes. You might want to taper it even more, like to a fine point. But I thought that this was a really kind of quick and efficient way of getting that more complicated shape going. And then what I wanted to do is, because we're going to be using this in a lot of like splatter circulars and stuff like that, my goal is to put the bottom of this at the center of the texture. So I just got a tile generator, set it to 1 by 1, image input, and then I'm going to scale this down a little bit and offset it towards the top. And I'm just sort of eyeballing getting this into the exact middle. If you were wanting to be a real scientist about this, you could build a node that does this, and maybe we'll actually do that on Patreon at some point. But I'm just using this transform 2D to check that my middle's kind of close to the middle. So even when I scatter it, like I randomize the seed here, just making sure it's just about at the middle. So I probably want to scale it down a bit more. Probably to 0.5, because that's like the halfway mark. And put it up a bit more. This is closer to what I want. Somewhere in here is fine. And really what I'll do now is output this, because we're going to put this into its own graph. I just built an output node where we scatter these individually. So what I'm going to do here is make a brand new graph and call this grass blade tufts or something. And in this new graph, I'll drag our gen graph in, and we can just seed it until we find a grass blade shape we like. And I'm going to grab a couple that are kind of different looking. Like that. And I'm going to put these into a splatter circular. So I'll start with just this, and I'll put in 3. And I'll switch to my image input. Now these are really small. I'm now scattering this blade around in a circle, but I'll scale it up a bunch. So put it to like 2 or 3 or something. And bring the radius in. The nice part is, because we have these all relatively at the center, we can just set our radius to very close to 0. And they'll scale up from the center. So it's much harder to control if you haven't done it this way. And then I'm going to turn the spread amount lower, so they're like all kind of bunched up nice and close. And then I'm going to rotate the whole ring so it's 90 degrees up. And then you can do stuff like scale random, scale these up quite a bit more. Add some luminance random, which I did. And then I could as well add a little bit of pattern rotation random, just a little bit. Now, because they're all tending to rotate that way, I might rotate the whole ring a little bit more to compensate in the other direction. And now if I seed this splatter circular, we're getting these kind of varied up grass tufts. Now we're only using one grass pattern. So I can go down to my pattern input and put this up to 3 and plug these in to be able to get these other versions involved. So now all 3 grass blades show up. And it was at this point I was like, well, these are looking a little straight. They don't have enough like curve to them. So I actually hopped back to the blade generator and wanted to add some sort of like sway and movement to these, like some little like wind type action, right? So that they look a little bit more natural. So for stuff like this, I love a vector morph. I just did my node tier list for all the warps and blurs, and this guy, like spoiler, was like in top billing. I think it's the top of S actually, or very close to the top of S tier, I think. What I'll do here is just grab a god. This is just like a mega warp. It's really good at doing this kind of like big shape moves. So I'll plug in a normal at like really high strength. And I'm just doing very high strength on this so you can see it like visually. But plug this in, plug that shape in, and this will allow us to kind of warp our shape. Now it sort of like squeezes in or expands out when you have it on this mode, which you may or may not want. But what you can do is rotate this normal map with a normal vector rotation node. Rotate it like 90 degrees. And instead of squeezing in and out, it's going to curl. So you get this nice sort of like bend to them, right? This nice kind of warp, which I think is like a really effective look. And I might want to zoom out from this noise a little bit more. And I'm just going to make this really strong just so it's easy to see. But we get this nice curl action. Now I probably don't want the middle to move, right? So a flat normal, so if you just search for a normal color node, won't work at all. It just won't animate whatsoever. So I could just make a blend and get something like a Gaussian spot. And that's basically me just making the middle into a flat normal so that it kind of anchors the middle in place. And the size of this shape will increase the size of that mask. But this allows me to sort of lock the bottom in position so that it never moves, so that when I do blending and further graphs, it doesn't wind up interrupting where its starting point is. So with this selected, I'll go into the graph tufts. You can see this is very different looking now. So it's probably the case that these are a little strong, the warps. So I'll go back and tune this down a little. I'm also going to copy this whole section because we're going to want to put it in the grass tufts as well. And I'm just going to seed this whole graph. Right, so we get these really interesting grass shapes. I think the scale random is a little high. But you can see we end up getting these really kind of interesting different shapes here. And I wanted to do the same thing in here. So I'm just pasting in the warp from the other graph. And I would do like much the same thing here, where we now apply a warp to the entire section, right? So that they're not so different. We have them all kind of, now all three swaying in the same direction. And I do like an auto level here just to make sure we have our full grayscale value. And then I did an output here, and it might be the case that these warps are too strong, but we can always adjust that. And then for my final graph, I would go like, call this something like grass blade section, I think I used. And I wanted to spread multiple of these. I didn't delete all of my extra outputs, so delete all these. And I could spread a couple of these. I think I just did 3 again. And in this way, you're able to quickly put together, so very same thing, right? Image input, I only want 3 of them. I can set the radius down really low, scale them up by a big amount, lower the spread, and I'm going to rotate that ring 90 degrees. We don't want to have just one input pattern. We want to have like 3. Plug these in, and then we can seed these and just find versions of that grass tuft that we really like. And this is how I went about creating those shapes. Let me turn the spread down a bit more. Put the radius up a bit so they scatter a bit more. This is how I created those those grass patterns that I then went and spread around in the main graph. So back in that main graph, I want to talk about how I scattered these grass blades, right? So here's those sections we built. I just used tile samplers to spread these shapes around. And what I did is just built this sort of random noise. This is not terribly interesting, but this noise creates the procedural placement of all the grass blades in this graph. So if I were to go and, you know, crank this histogram scan to full, we would get grass blades covering the entire thing. It's going to take a sec to step through the whole graph, but we would get grass blades covering everything but our water section, which is kind of cool. So some of these grass blades are placed procedurally. They just kind of show up in like these kind of randomly generated areas, which is fine, right? I'm a big fan of, you know, leaning into the procedural aspect of Designer. But in here, like we did have some blades in some very specific spots, like they tended to cluster, you know, in these little areas, and we did some of that procedurally, but I also wanted the ability to specifically place them in certain areas. Because we're doing this kind of fan art that, you know, kind of blends it all in, and it's not really a tileable, it's just like a piece of art where we're exploring all these different techniques. So I actually used an SVG here to be able to paint in exactly where I wanted some extra blades. So this is a fun technique you can do. The way this works is I just have my height map. Again, we built this, I think this took up like the first probably 7 hours or 6 hours of the Patreon video, was just getting to this point where we had all of our brick height map all done. It's probably more like 4 hours. And then what you can do is just use this to preview on an SVG. So I'm actually gonna like disconnect all this for a second. This was like where I put in the blades in the specific areas I wanted. As you can see, right now it's just the procedural blades. We don't have any of the custom ones. So I just made an SVG node, right? So vector graphics. And you go from new resource, and you can call this whatever you want, like grass distribution, whatever. And I'm plugging in the height map here, just so I can see where I'm painting. And in here, you can use all the kind of same vector tools you'd want, like the pen and path tool, whatever you'd like. But I could just do like pen, and that allows you to just draw vector graphics like you would in any other software. But I'm painting in full green. Both the outline of this and the fill are green because I'm using a material selector and I'm grabbing full green. I don't even need to pick it. I know it's just full green. And then I blurred it a little bit just to soften it. And I'm just taking that and adding it directly onto our procedural distribution mask. And what that allows me to do is just paint grass blades exactly where I want them. So I can go back to here and say, okay, well, what if I wanted them to be kind of like, you know, in a little section here, right? I can just go in here and decide, let's add some to this specific area. Hit enter to close it. You can see it's going to take a second to update, but then I get the blades exactly where I want them. If I wanted them more in that staircase as an example, I could go in here and just paint some and have them like follow the stairs a little bit and follow the cracks and do whatever. So this is a really nice thing to give you like some flexibility with where you want the actual blades themselves to generate. Right, we put them over here, right there. And the nice thing is that we have this system set up that as we just paint these shapes, the whole graph sort of just updates, right? Which is really, really handy. So for instance, if I wanted them like kind of more around this water plane here, right? I could just add a bunch more. We'll put them on this part of the grass. So near here, right? I'm gonna fill in this little space with them. And so obviously this is just kind of a preview. In the Patreon video, I explain exactly how we went through this like whole process of building this system. But you can see it's really nice to be able to just draw where we want extra stuff and have it update. And all the flowers show up and all that stuff, right? So it's really nice to have that system. It gives you a ton of flexibility. So I think now what we'll do is just a couple albedo tricks as well. So I've hopped into a modified version of this graph where I've stripped out some sections. So it's not quite the finished Patreon graph, but it's got a lot of it. And I want to we'll go over a couple of tricks for adding some kind of more hand-painty, stylized looking detail. So at this point, this is where my albedo was at. It's just a bunch of, you know, kind of just initial base color passes. But I want to create these kind of like strokey details. So I'm going to go over a fun thing you can do here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make kind of like a rough approximation of a brush stroke. So I'm going to grab a gradient linear 2 and just transform this in a bit and turn my tiling off so it stops repeating. So go up to your tiling mode, set it to absolute, no tiling. And I'm going to blur it just to soften the edge a little bit. And then auto level this. And I can make these much smaller than the parent graph. So set like the absolute size to like 256 or something. Because it's good to try to save. We talked about this a lot in the video. We were just trying to like save resources. Because you saw when I updated that grass earlier, it took maybe like, I don't know, 5 to 8 seconds to update. So the reason why it's not taking so long is because we did a good job of just keeping these light when we needed to. And then all I did was like trapezoid transform this one a little to create like a narrower tail. And I scattered these around a bunch. And I had a ton of them. So let's start with like 64 by 64. Some really high number. Do image input to get that brush stroke around. You can just do a bunch of random position, scale these up a bunch, all the kind of good stuff to just get some initial randomness. But then I did a couple different things to have not as much randomness to the scale. I'm driving the scale with a cloud. So go up and turn the scale map multiplier up. So where they're darker, they're going to get smaller in the cloud here. And when they're brighter, they're going to get bigger. So this just feels a bit, the randomness is a bit better. And then we can do like luminance random to get some random grayscale values. Scale that up a bunch more. And we're going to do a number of fun things here. I also want them to be taller than this, so I'm going to go to their size and turn these up to like, I don't know, 1.5 or something. So they stretch out. Oops. Where their rotation should come from is from the height map. So I have a dot node of our final height map. You can see we have a lot of them where we've been just pumping in different parts of the detail. But I'm going to take our underlying height map. You can do this with any of your materials' underlying height maps. I'm going to blur this just a little bit and turn it into a normal map because I'm going to use this to control. I'll put this really high just so you can see it. To control the rotation of these. So I'll plug this into the vector map. And so this will make it look like the brush strokes are painted on following the underlying height map. So I go down to rotation and turn the vector map multiplier up. You can kind of actually see the pedestal shape under it already. And then I'm going to do a hard 90-degree rotation. So now they kind of flow. If you see this slope here, if I put that 90-degree rotation off, you'll see that it aligns along the stroke. Right? So where you have this dip here, you get this alignment. So you can kind of actually see that pedestal pattern like this in the shape here. And we could have more of these if we wanted to. And scale them up a bit as well, so we don't have as much black space. But this helps conform these more to the underlying shape of the height map. I put more of these. The more of them you have, like generally, the more obvious this will be. But something like that is fine. And then what I did was put these through a non-uniform directional warp. So this is just like a direction warp. This guy got ranked very, very highly in my node tier list for the warps and the blurs. But what I'm going to do is vary up the intensity of this warp But we'll just use this cloud or whatever. Although if we do it, I might want to rebalance this cloud. So auto level it, then use a level, because the cloud's just awfully bright. So doing this just makes it a bit more even. I might even zoom out from it a little. But if I use this as the intensity map input of our non-directional warp, it's just going to give you random warp intensities based on this noise. But I'm going to specify the warp angle using our height map. And so this does, again, a really good job of making this noise conform more or less to the underlying height map. So they look more like strokes along the pattern. You could also do like a slope blur and grab another normal of your height map that's not blurred this time and do a curvature smooth. And you get these really nice broad curvature highlights here. And I'm going to use this as my input on the slope blur. And again, this is just going to be more just kind of conforming it to that underlying height. And I may want to blur the curvature a little bit, just to soften these really harsh transitions a little bit, and then auto level it. Yeah, like that. I actually kind of want these rotated 90 degrees, I think. Yeah. But you can see we're creating these kind of just brushstroke patterns that more or less follow along with the underlying shape, which is really great. Now, to apply this, so how to make this actually useful, this is the real trick. So I just got a normal map of this final noise. Now it's going to be really, really noisy, but that's fine. It's actually what we want. And then I'm going to do a curvature Sobel, and I'm going to histogram scan this to get these kind of individual islands, basically. Like this. Right, so it's a real mess, but this is exactly what we want, basically. And I'm probably going to have more of them. So put these to like 120 or something like that. But these are going to become my actual like brush strokes. And what I'll do is do a flood fill of these. Now these islands are going to be really wacky and crazy, right? You can see the underlying pattern really well. That's like where the top of our spike is and an individual stone. And it's nice that they sort of follow it more or less. We could scan these to just get them to conform a bit less. And what I'm going to do here is do a flood fill to color. And this is just going to fill these individual islands, whatever color happens to be underneath them. And what I'm going to do is plug in our base color up to this point. You can see that these all take in their color information from whatever pixel is below them on the color input. And if I distance this now to close up the gap in between, so whatever went into the flood fill goes into the mask, we get these great like brush stroke patterns where it's sort of simplifying the underlying height map. Right? It's very, very cool. And obviously the more of this, the more noise we have in here, the finer the brush strokes. So if we set this to like, I don't know, really high, like 240 or something, we're going to get way more streaks and then much more high frequency of brush strokes. But I think this is like a really great way, and I think I just blended it in with the original texture. Right, so grabbed this, blended this in, and I don't want it to be just like a straight blend. So if I just preview it over here, I didn't want it to just like get laid on over top at full strength. You see we get this really nice kind of brush stroke patterns here. I'd rather blend these on. So I also got a flood fill to gradient. And I can put a bunch of random gradients on this, so turn the angle variation way up. And then same thing, distance this so we get rid of all the black spaces between them. And I can use this as a mask to blend these on. So instead of being at like full intensity, just this like giant brushstroke that's sort of like pasted right over top of everything, this will fade them in and out from what you had before it. And I think this is a really nice way to kind of get some of that painty look going, and while still kind of embracing the procedural nature of it. The last thing I wanted to discuss is how we went about making that water, that kind of like painty looking water in the cracks that we had over here. So we already had a mask for where that water went that we made as we actually created the water in the height map. And what I did was, whenever I'm trying to add an effect, the first thing I want to do is just pick a color, blend it over, right? So I just picked a color from the concept of like what that water looked like. So it was just sort of like in here, in here somewhere. It's a little too dark. Just to get it in, and then let's make it more complicated from there. So how I got the kind of ripples and stuff here, I mean, the AO is already working, which is nice, but how I got those ripples was really fun, actually. I think this is like a neat, I know I keep saying, I should be like arrested for the amount of times I say neat in these videos, but I just think this stuff is so cool. What I'm gonna do is actually use the PBR render node. So I think this is a fun way of getting some of these fake painted looks. So I'm going to use the PBR render. So what this will do, it's very interesting. I'm going to switch this. It just puts whatever your inputs are on an object and renders them essentially with like lighting and whatever else you want to do. But I'm going to switch this to a plane and scale this up so it fills the sheet. Which I forget, I used to know this exact number you need to fill it exactly. But it's like 1.06, 1.7, 0.75. There you go. And we can plug in our color here. And what's really cool is if you just have like a normal, so if we had like, imagine this water is just sort of lumpy, right? It's windy or something. You can see that this is like faking the lighting you would get on these waves. So I'll put the scale to like 8 or something. Because it's applying all of these, and we can make them be really smooth, right? Because it's water, so it should be very reflective. So the roughness should be like black, essentially. And you can put this beauty image out. And you can see that's how we're going to get, I'm going to turn the scale of the waves up, those water bumps and waves. Because it's just rendering it, it's just saying, okay, well, you're a very smooth plane. And if we want, we can even plug in an environment map. So if I go to my, my library, excuse me. Sure, I'm not able to see in my library. Bizarre. Doesn't seem to want to let me see it. All right, well, I'll worry about that later. That must be a bug. But I'll just go grab it from the original. Just grabbing, you can just search environment maps in your library and you can look through a bunch of HDRIs. So I'm just going to steal it from the water I built in here. So just take that one. So you would be able to search your library for this, basically. Substance comes with a number of them by default. I'm not sure why my library just doesn't want to show stuff right now. But this environment map can get plugged into the environment map here, and it's going to apply this lighting to our render. So this is going to help us get some more interesting reflections. And it's probably the case that their normal is too strong. Like it's really, really strong. But I think the fun thing is this allows us to get a lot of that kind of faked lighting information as if you had painted it all in. Right? We get these nice kind of specular highlights, quote unquote, that look like they're painted. Now, I don't think this is exactly all we want, because the waves we're building here are just kind of random. And what I'd rather do is have these waves sort of conform to the shoreline. Right? So it's just loading the rest of this. I'd like those waves to sort of follow the shore, like where the water body meets the stone. So what I did to do that is grab this and blur it a little. So I beveled our water shape. There you go. I'm just waiting for our albedo to update. I'm actually going to switch to the OpenGL render. I prefer to do color work in the OpenGL render right now, just because I find the other render to be a bit too specular. There you go. So I'm taking our water mask and beveling it inwards. I'm going to auto level this and then blur it a bit. Something like that. Auto level it. And what I'm going to do here is get a tile sampler and spread a bunch of parabolas that are unevenly sized. Right, so they'll be like twice as tall as they are wide or something. Add a bit of randomness to the sizes. But the fun thing is, we're going to do a similar thing to what we did with the edge damage at the beginning of the video, where we make a normal, plug that into the vector map, go down to rotation, and increase the vector map multiplier. We need way more of these. Like, we'll do like 48 by 40 or something. And you can see they spin to follow the path of the water. You can see them kind of rotating. And we probably need way more still. See out here, they're not doing anything, but in our water shape, they're filling the water shape and like following its curvature. So I'll just go and like scale these up a bunch more. Add some position random. Add a bit of color random. And the idea is, if we use this as our normal map, we're going to have these waves follow the shape here a bit more. Now they're really strong, right? This normal map is like really, really strong. So I'll put this to like 20 or something. And they're really harsh transitions. So we would want to blur this for sure to soften it. But now you can see our water actually, like, we have like ripples basically coming away from the surface. And this water is too dark for sure. So I brighten up our base color. Something more like that. And the normal strength is a little too strong too still. But that's definitely on the right path. And then if we want the blur, the ripples to be, we could also like slope blur this with our mask here. Like that. And if our I think we still want way more ripples too. Like 100, let's say. Yeah. There you go. So you can really do these fun tricks to get this look of this painted detail here. And if we thought maybe these highlights are too sharp, I mean, I think they're pretty cool right now, but if you thought they were too sharp, you could make this less rough so that the specular highlight is broader. Right, so this is a really fun setup you do that I think can add a lot of detail, and it takes some of the math out of your head for how to actually lay in all these highlights yourself, and you can let the renderer do it for you, which can be really cool. All right, so I think that does us for today. I had a lot of fun with this one. This has been like a real kind of interesting thing to kind of crack away on in the last kind of like 2 months in my free time. It's been really, this is the type of stuff I really like the look of. So it's fun to try to approach it, right? To try to figure out what makes it look the way it looks and try to build that back together. It's just a really fun exercise. I hope you guys all learned something useful in here, or at least got you started on what you're trying to do and yourself apply it to your own work. Again, if you'd like to see the entire kind of like 11-hour exhaustive, work through of all of this, you can follow me on Patreon. You get access to that and you get to see the entire, step-by-step process. I think that's really important. For me, like, that's how I like to learn. Like, it's not enough for me to kind of just watch someone breeze through how they do stuff. They need to kind of explain it. And if nothing else, I just love to yap. So when I'm using a node in those tutorials, like I did today, I would just say exactly why I'm using it, right? Like if I'm gonna use a slope blower, I'm gonna explain like what it does and why it does what it's doing right now and why I want that, right? So it actually, like, I think it helps people build up a library in their head of exactly how all of these things work and then how they can actually apply it to their own stuff, right? 'Cause instead of it being an idea where you just follow me one at a time, like following a recipe, you'll learn, but I don't think you'll learn as fast as actually kind of building up that library in your head about how all these things work. So that's my like preferred approach to teaching. And if you appreciate that, I would love the support over there and you guys get access to that big long thing. You can suffer me just yapping for 11 hours straight. A lot of people have done it. People have worked through all of the long form tutorials. And there's a lot. There's probably like 70 to 80 hours of it now. So that's quite a feat, I think. But if you got enough from today, I'm very happy to hear that, right? Feel free in the comments to ask like other questions or, what you'd like to see next. I think what I would like to do at some point, I had so much fun on this. I would really like to go in and I've been playing a lot of like ARAM because they have the mayhem mode now, which is sort of like roguelike elements inside of the game, which I think is really cool. And I've been playing a lot of ARAM, which again is not good for me. But I think I want to do like a Howling Abyss material at some point. So we can do some like wood in this style and some like the snow and ice and have that be a kind of very different look to this, but kind of similar tricks, which would be fun. So I'd like to do more of these in the future. If you enjoyed this, I would appreciate the like. If you liked the video, please like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends, all that kind of normal YouTube stuff. That'd be really appreciated. And then hopefully we'll see you guys in the next one. And maybe the next one of these when we do like I said, a Howling Abyss one or something. So appreciate it so much and we'll see you guys in the next video.